Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Did you know that research has validated that in order for most business entities to effectively compete and survive in their marketplace, they must adopt a dynamic enterprise IT strategy using a mix of disparate on-premise and cloud environments, which are often supported by an API-first mantra. Today, 85% of enterprise IT organizations have adopted such strategies, which will be growing to over 90% by the end of 2020. However, they all share the common fear: API security threats. This likely includes everyone joining today's webinar, Hybrid API Management Architectures. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You're listening using your computer speaker's default system. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will also have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the question pane on the control panel. You may send your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. If for any reason we don't have time to get to your question during the webinar, we will answer your question via email within 24 hours. Our webinar today will be presented by Olaf van Gorp, Technical Sales Europe with Akana, and Ilko Helton, Principal Consultant with Devoteam. At this time, I would like to turn the presentation over to Olaf.
Right, also on my behalf, welcome to this webinar, and by means of a brief introduction of what we are going to discuss today. Brief introduction to the topic. So I think what we have seen is that APIs, they're now really regarded as an effective vehicle for integration. We see that they have been regarded as such for quite some time now. However, corporations granting APIs that more strategic significance within their overall integration architecture, that's something of much more recent date. But we do see a clear tendency there. And in fact, this is what we really witness with the enterprises we work with today. Now, a typical consequence of that repositioning of APIs is a proliferation of APIs, you might say. So we not only talk about APIs exposed by the systems in the inner landscapes of these enterprises, but APIs also include external systems, partner systems in particular. So you might say that APIs gradually have become a critical building block that allows for the creation of what we now refer to as digital ecosystems. So these systems support business processes that encompass systems inside and out, and they may be deployed in an enterprise-owned data center, but also in various clouds, of course. And I think this is fantastic, and it provides plenty of opportunity, but at the same time, it does introduce some challenges of its own. So for one thing, APIs in this position, they regarded as a strategic asset, they obviously require management themselves. And another thing are a number of more architectural challenges, like where to exactly deploy your API management component. So that's obviously something that we are going to address in this webinar. So by means of a brief introduction to ourselves, my name is Olaf van Gorp. As it says here, I'm a technical sales with Akana, and I have been for the past 5 years. I do APIs, API management, and Akana. Passionate about that, with specific interest in API security, and that's me.
Hi everybody, welcome to this webinar. My name is Ilko Helton. I'm a principal consultant on API management at the Devoteam Netherlands. I've been working with Akana API Management software as well for over 2 years now, and I'm very enthusiastic to be presenting this webinar together with Olaf today.
Very good. So briefly on the companies that we represent. I assume that you're kind of familiar with them, but just in case. So I myself, I represent Akana. As you probably know, is a leading API management solution provider. We have been as such for over a decade, with quite a history when it comes to APIs and APIs used for integration. Today, what we essentially do is provide technology, but also expertise and thought leadership around APIs and API management, with a very explicit focus on API security. And in fact, we are recognized in the market as having arguably the strongest offer when it comes to API security. And obviously, we are very proud of that because, as it says here on the slide, the world's leading organizations, they actually rely on Akana to secure their APIs. So that's a position that we're very proud of and we like to maintain for the time to come.
Sure, yeah. So let me introduce Devoteam then. So Devoteam is well known for our work in the digital transformation space. We are present in 18 countries, mainly in the EMEA region, employing over 7,000 professionals. And in the Netherlands, particularly very well known in the application integration space. And actually, we're an authority on the field of API management. So for Devoteam Netherlands, we're headquartered in Amsterdam and The Hague. And on the slide, you see the 7 core offers from Devoteam, where obviously transformation management is a big offer, and API management is part of our agile IT offering.
Right. Okay. So first, setting some context, right? So we're talking about the digital ecosystems of enterprises. So we want to give a bit of context on that. Well, what we see in the market is that there's an increasing dependency on digitalization. Choosing the right technologies for organizations is key, and communications within those ecosystems are more and more relying on digital channels, actually. Mm-hmm. So where APIs are actually the core form of integration for those companies. So choosing the right API management technology, therefore, is very key. Yep. What we see at those companies is that their IT landscapes are getting more and more distributed or disparate. So channels that you might think of are channels how you are integrating with your partners, with your suppliers, how end users are consuming your applications, making use of mobile devices, making use of your portals, while all interacting with your central backend systems. We often see companies adopting different strategies, cloud strategies, even multi-cloud strategies. Their applications, their backends might be hosted in any type of environment. Might be adopting AWS technology, Azure clouds, GCP, Google Cloud, and all these applications are integrating potentially via APIs. And yet you still want to maintain that centralized management over all these APIs and centralized governance over all these APIs. So that's what we're really talking about here with the topic today. Yeah. And to add a little to that, I think the significance of APIs in today's IT landscape, well, that's something that doesn't need further debate. I think what's very interesting, if you look at how enterprises approach APIs and the business case behind those APIs, is often that they find themselves in a very new, how do you say that, in a very new environment, if you will. So suddenly they may need to be available 24/7, for example. They will need to be able to very rapidly respond to their customers. And at the same time, customer demand is increasing. And in order to effectively deal with that, you may think of solutions supported by APIs, but yet that also means that you have to that you have need control over the APIs themselves. And what's even more is that since once you start using APIs, the systems, the applications that the end users are using, systems built on top of these APIs, may sometimes result in the fact that the API provider itself does not have ultimate visibility anymore on the customer, right? The customer is now being serviced through intermediate applications. So what that kind of means is that the only way that you have to understand what an end user is doing, what your customer is doing, is by means of the APIs that they are using. So the API calls that you see coming in through your APIs. So it's not only a means to, let's say, offer data, but it's also a means to extract business value in terms of being able to see what the behavior of your customer is when they are using your APIs.
Yeah, so let's have a look at an example ecosystem, right? So we've been talking about integrations with mobile apps. So you might be having products in which your consumers are interacting with you via a mobile app. You might have company portals, customer care systems, which actually need to interact with all type of systems in your organization, like your CRMs or your ERPs. And actually, all of these channels need to interact with each other. And typically, this is done over APIs. So, looking also at some of our telco clients, for instance, right? We see that they are also offering an app in which you can monitor your Wi-Fi signal. You can share your Wi-Fi with other people. Yep. But all the logic of this application and all the data is, of course, not only in the app. They need to interact with the background. With yes. The backend systems in the background to gather the data and send data back to your enterprise systems. So yeah, obviously these integrations are most likely to be under all type of different legislations and regulations, data privacy, GDPR. So it's very important that you govern and protect and secure these integrations properly. Because actually proper management of these integration channels is really required to protect your brand reputation, because you don't want to be linked with any exposure of exactly of your customer data, right?
Yes, exactly. Couldn't agree more. So once we start talking about API management, well, I don't think, as I said before, that it needs any debate that APIs are kind of moving center stage nowadays. So they are really becoming of strategic relevance within the overall IT landscape. Once they are acknowledged as such, as let's say strategic building blocks, then I think it's almost by demand. It's almost an implicit something that they require management of themselves. Right, so in fact, I think that the moment you start talking about API management as such, then you kind of implicitly also acknowledge the fact that APIs have gotten to this level of importance within the enterprise. This is kind of a definition that we use nowadays to describe what API management is all about, and I think that the list below shows a number of, let's say, the core aspects that are typically associated with API management and API management solutions. So, well, it goes without saying that obviously you need to be able to first of all provide your APIs, to create them, to publish them, to make them available, but you also have to be able to manage their development and their deployment across various environments. And then once they are there, then of course you want to have control over the way that they are consumed, so that first of all, developers have access to the API and all the information they need to consume them, but also management across what happens during the consumption life cycle, if you will. So you want to monitor your consumer behavior. You want to tune your system to better facilitate consumption or particular consumers, etc. And perhaps at some stage you also want to stop particular parties from consuming your APIs or throttle them. In terms of API deployment, it's of course important, and that's the main topic of this webinar today, that you provide a deployment environment that is flexible, that addresses all of the requirements that come with deploying your solution, in terms of dealing with performance and scale, but also in terms of are we going for a cloud strategy? Is it going to be on-prem first, cloud later? Etc., etc. Can we sufficiently scale? Can we deal with peaks when they occur? And then last but definitely not least, we have to be able to effectively monitor the APIs, their behavior. Are they behaving as we expect them to do? And perhaps even more importantly, what analytics can we derive from those APIs at runtime? Because, like I said, that may be key in continuing to understand what your actual customers are doing out there with the data that you provide them with, or with the business capabilities or functions that you give them access to.
Yeah, so this is really the business value that you were talking about.
Yes.
Right? So you can definitely see, okay, what's happening, what services are being consumed by whom, what are my most popular services that I'm opening. So it's a very important channel. And of course, the monitoring, it's operational and functional. So
yes, exactly.
Be able to see the latencies, be able to see the error, the different error codes that may be occurring, seeing the geographic distribution of the requests.
Yes.
And how are your backends behaving?
Yep,
also very important.
Yep. And is your API layer effectively protecting that backend in terms of access, but also in terms of potential overflow? Because most enterprise systems, they may simply not be able to deal with the traffic generated by an API. Hopefully benign traffic, but you can also imagine scenarios where there is some kind of malicious intent by somebody accessing your API.
Yeah.
So obviously API management brings us to API management solutions.
Yeah, which typically consists of the elements that are listed here, right? So let me explain a little bit about it, so we get a full understanding of what an API management solution consists of. So it all starts with the API registry, right? So this is really the central core component where actually all the configuration of the APIs is being done. Yeah. So this is where you define what APIs are you going to expose, how will you protect them, who will have access to them, but also what type of policies will you be enforcing on your APIs. Yep. These policies can be traffic management, so quality of service related. They can also be related to authentication, authorization. So that's very important. Of course, the API registry is also the central place where you can see your monitoring data, where you can see your analytics. So very much the core administration component, I would say. Then there's also the API portal, which is basically providing a catalog of all the APIs, all the services that you are making available to your end users. So this is where developers can search for APIs, can find APIs, access them, request access to them, depending on your strategy. Can they be allowed automatically? Is there a manual approval process?
Right.
They can do test calls, but also they can read up on the specifications. So how should I invoke the API? What parameters do I need to send? What responses can I expect?
Yeah.
So very important.
Which order to invoke them?
Yeah. So if companies or consumers are going to interact with your systems, it's not anymore that you send them an email, here's the manual, and let me know when you have trouble integrating. It's a very active support showing online the most recent integration manuals. Okay, last component, but certainly not the least, is the actual API gateway. So this is the component which will be processing the actual API traffic. The API gateway is also what we sometimes refer to as the policy enforcement point. Yep. So all the policies that you have configured for your APIs in the API registry are being applied on the API through the API gateway. We call it decentralized here because that's actually the topic for today. So your gateways can be anywhere while still interacting with your central API registry component.
Yes.
It is interacting with that component in order to retrieve the API configurations. So it knows what APIs to proxy, obviously. And it's interacting also to send analytical data back to the API registry. So in order to fill your analytical data on your API registry component, it needs to send out all the usage statistics back to the registry component. So these type of interactions are very important that we need to consider when we are actually taking the components apart in a distributed scenario.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So it kind of shows in a very simple graphical display the relationship between the various components that we discussed. And if you look at, or if we zoom in on how to optimally deploy them, given the scenarios that we are about to discuss, then traditionally what you saw is that either a deployment of your API management solution would be on premises in its entirety. And this, of course, for many years was the de facto deployment model, because first of all, there was no such thing as a mature cloud. And secondly, especially big enterprises that are subject to all kinds of regulations that take security at heart, they were obviously hesitant to simply delegate responsibilities to the cloud. But nowadays, there's obviously a clear shift in that paradigm. So we see that there is often a cloud strategy, perhaps even a cloud-only strategy. And that same strategy then applies to API management solutions. So you will find their solutions hosted 100% in a vendor cloud. So either fully on premises or fully SaaS or fully cloud. Those were the flavors that we had until recently, you could say.
Still valid cases in that sense. They could still be very valid for different use cases for different customers. But I would say the hybrid is a very strong alternative flavor to combine the benefits of addition. Yeah, definitely. When looking at the hybrid approach, actually, this is where you would have your central components still hosted in a SaaS fashion. So that means that you still don't have any operational concerns on hosting these central components, on scaling them, on keeping them highly available, and all of that is still managed by your vendor. On the other hand, you have full control on hosting the actual gateways, so the policy enforcement points yourself on your own cloud infrastructure, on-premise infrastructure, wherever you would like to deploy them. Of course, it's always a very strong practice to keep your API gateway as close as possible to your backend, to your provider application, in order to guarantee the highest degree of security there. But also there are other benefits why you might want to choose for an hybrid approach, like if your regulations or your data privacy rules don't allow you to let your API content or your data go over a third-party systems, you might want to consider to have your gateways under your own control, not send or not let that traffic go through a third-party component, but have it all on your own control, let's say. So I think still you would have then your central management components hosted for you. You have central management over all your APIs, but you're still supporting a very distributed landscape of applications. Olaf, anything to add there?
Yeah. I think that's already quite a comprehensive summary. There's a few other benefits that I can think of. So obviously, when you think of moving to the cloud, then you may have your backend systems or part of your backend systems in the cloud, but obviously there's no such thing as the cloud. It will be in a particular cloud, and that's not necessarily the same cloud as your API management solution would be hosted in. So if you would have a pure SaaS approach, then there's still the risk that even though all of your components are distributed across clouds, that there is overhead in terms of, latency going from one cloud to the next, and perhaps even more significantly, additional costs that you may incur because once data go from one cloud to the next, that will typically be associated with cost.
Cost that's out, right?
Yes. Well, once it leaves the cloud, a number of cloud providers charge for that. So that's another scenario where it would make sense to kind of distribute your gateways even across multiple clouds, again in close proximity to the systems that provide the backend capability, which would be nicely supported by a hybrid architecture, by a hybrid approach. So this is talking about a hybrid architecture or a hybrid topology in more general terms. If we take a look at how we do that with Akana, well, then this picture obviously maps nicely to that previous picture. And what you see here is that essentially all of the core API management components will indeed be hosted in the Akana cloud. So you will see the central registry component there. You will see the API portal capabilities hosted there. And you could even see, or you will even see, API gateway capabilities hosted there. But at the same time, there is the possibility to deploy additional gateway instances, additional gateway clusters in your own data center or in your own cloud of choice. And I think the important takeaway here is that regardless of where these gateways are deployed, so whether they are deployed in, let's say, the Akana cloud or in your own data center or in your own cloud of choice, they will still be centrally managed through that central API registry, meaning that through that registry, you still have centralized control over your APIs, regardless of in which gateway zone, if you will, they are deployed. And at the same time, you're able to extract metrics, to aggregate metrics from those APIs, again, irrespective of where they are deployed. So in summary, you might say that what it allows you to do is kind of delegate all of the administrative overhead and the infrastructure / operational overhead, or at least to a very large extent, to the Akana cloud. And in terms of operation, the only thing you need to worry about is the deployment of those gateway instances, which is a fairly simple and straightforward process, which is in fact supported through automation. And you can imagine that obviously it's possible to deploy Docker technology and the like when it comes to deploying gateways. So yeah, just a lightweight implementation in your own data center, and all of the real heavy lifting is still delegated to the Akana cloud.
Yeah, so you can also combine. It's also hybrid in a scenario that you can have gateways still SaaS hosted, combined with gateways on premises. In that sense, it's also
yes,
a good possibility. Do I have to do a lot to make this work from my data center perspective? Is this the infrastructure team burden, or is it very easy to set this up?
Well, from my perspective, it is indeed very easy, because like the Akana gateway is a very lightweight component. Yeah. Obviously, it has to be lightweight because it has to scale well. It is built for performance. So essentially, what you do is it's a fairly simple installation process. And the one thing that you need to take care of is that there's actual connectivity from the gateway to the Akana cloud. So all of the interaction with the cloud will be initiated from the gateway.
So there is outbound traffic.
It's only outbound, yes.
That's great.
Right, so you don't need to have firewall ports opened, etc., etc. Obviously, typically there will be some kind of proxy sitting in between. But the fact that you only have to deal with call-outs makes life much easier. And by the way, the communication is mutual TLS based, so that in itself is already a guarantee for security.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So having said all this, I think it's time to sum up the benefits that we are seeing from this approach, right? So we have mentioned quite a few over the presentation, but I think it's good to give a proper overview of all the benefits that we are seeing in this approach. Mm-hmm. Right. So from a governance perspective, I think we're still seeing a very strong capability to centrally manage and maintain your API integrations. From security perspective, very well covered. You can protect your APIs as close as possible to your actual backend services, so it doesn't need to travel a lot of different networks before it actually reaches your backend, which makes it much easier to get this level of security. From a processing perspective, well, obviously, if you can place your gateway so close to your actual providing application, you're best positioned for low latency traffic. And also in terms of complexity, we see a reduced complexity when using bundling different cloud instances. Also reduced complexity in the sense that you only need to take care of hosting the gateways yourself. So that's very strong.
Yeah, and I think that if you talk about complexity, I mean, the nice thing is that these gateways are essentially, they're kind of empty shells when you first spin them up. So they still depend on the central API registry to derive their configuration, so to speak. So they will retrieve from that central instance the information that they need to run at runtime. So which APIs do we need to deploy on this particular gateway? Which policies do we need to execute? And talking about policies, these policies are themselves still centrally managed. So if there's any change in a policy, any update in a particular security aspect, for example, then that update can be configured centrally, and that policy will then still be applied across all of the API endpoints, across all of those API gateway clusters in the various deployment zones that make part of your ecosystem.
Yeah.
To complete this summary, we already mentioned that a very important benefit coming from a hybrid deployment would be that you would be able to exclusively send your traffic through your own hybrid gateways, so your own local gateways. So no data would be flowing through the Akana cloud in that sense, and sometimes you're not even allowed to do that. Yeah, I think that's a very important benefit of this hybrid configuration. Then, in terms of scale, obviously you may expect ultimate scalability from your cloud solution provider, from your API management provider, but if there's any reason why you would prefer to have ultimate control over the behavior of your gateway, then yeah, that obviously would also be a reason to deploy them in your own data center or in your own cloud, meaning full control, full control over scaling them up as well. In terms of maintainability, we're dealing with a highly simplified architecture, in the sense that, yeah, again, you only deal with a fairly straightforward, lightweight component as part of your API management solution that's hosted in your own infrastructure, as opposed to a full on-prem deployment, which especially if you want to have an extreme high available solution, for example, it takes an effort. I mean, we know what it takes. And then last but not least, and this is a bit from an operational perspective, you would, of course, normally when you use a SaaS solution, delegate all of the actual, let's say, gateway container management to your SaaS provider. But having these things run in your own data center may give you the benefit that you can see what's actually happening at the gateway level. So you would have access to your own gateway logs directly, rather than depending on the vendor to share them with you. So again, that may be an important reason to go for a hybrid approach. And obviously, those gateways would be yours exclusively. So there's, unlike a SaaS platform, you don't share them with anyone else.
Right.
Okay. So yeah. So by means of the ultimate summary of this slide, you might say that in our view, a hybrid technology, and of course the solution that supports this kind of deployment model, kind of gives a perfect mix between centralized management on the one hand, and then ultimate flexibility in terms of deployment on the other, and all that without compromising API security, obviously, and also allowing for an optimal user experience.
Yeah, great. So let's see if the participants would like to learn more about the topic, or also would like to have a sort of assessment on their API strategy and on their setup. Mm-hmm. So let's see how we can help them here.
Okay.
So we can offer what we call an API strategy assessment, where actually we can check your strategy, help you develop your strategy, see if there are any bottlenecks, help you in finding the right business value that you want to achieve with this, yeah, I would say reach out to us in case you're interested. Our details are on the last slide, so you can find them there later on. We can do a full ASA engagement. We can do a workshop-based engagement. So a lot of possibilities how we can help you. Just reach out to us and we can talk further on the topic.
Yes, there's a lot more information to share, obviously. So yeah, if we manage to get you interested, then absolutely do not hesitate to reach out.
Great.
So with that, Shelby, I think we kind of came to the end of what we'd like to share today. Obviously, there may be questions by the audience. If there are any, then we are very happy to have a look and answer them.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you both so very much. We are going to begin the question and answer session. So I will just read them out. No one was specific to any one person, so I'll kind of throw this out for both of you. If the central API management components are hosted on a different location than the actual API gateways, is there proper security in place for this communication?
Yeah, I think a very good question. So obviously, security is the main concern, right? When dealing with APIs, opening up your IT systems. Yeah, it should be indeed, and I hope it is with a lot of the participants. So yeah, in that case, it's also very important that you secure all the connections of the different components of your API solution as well. Yes. I think you also mentioned, Olaf, during the webinar already that there's a strong security in the communication between the gateways and the central components. Yes. They're exchanging the API configuration, they're exchanging analytical data. I think I also heard you explaining that this is a mutual TLS that's being set up between those components, right?
Yes, we use mutual TLS for communication between, well, in this case, gateway and SaaS platform exclusively. Okay. So that in itself, at the transport layer, is something that's well, very hard to break, obviously. In order to ensure, and I'm not sure if the question also implicates that, but in order to ensure security at the API level, we obviously are able to provide a number of policies. You may know that Akana provides quite a collection of out-of-the-box policies that kind of address, yeah, each API security aspect that you can think of. So anything from authentication to authorization to message level security, you know, message signing, encryption, anything you can think of, really. And these policies, yeah, they can be applied to the APIs regardless of where the APIs are deployed. So in terms of security, I think the concern is understandable, but we can deliver a very strong solution there.
Wonderful. Okay, I do have another one. If I deploy my API gateway in a hybrid fashion, would they give me the same capabilities as the gateways on the SaaS platform?
Right, I'm very happy with that question, because yes, that's something that I don't think I explicitly mentioned in the story. So the answer is yes. So we do not, with Akana, we do not really distinguish in terms of capabilities or in terms of the deployment model, what capabilities we offer. So the same capabilities apply whether you're deploying the solution on premises or whether you use the SaaS offering, or whether you make use of a hybrid topology. So regardless of where these API gateways are deployed, they will offer the very same capabilities. So you will have access to the very same collection of service policies to execute on your APIs, for example. So yeah, sometimes you hear gateways, locally deployed gateways, referred to with other terms. So you may hear of the term micro gateway, for example. So from our perspective, yeah, there's no such thing as a micro gateway, really. So we feel that an API gateway you should be able to deploy it where it's most suitable, so where it best meets your requirements, and obviously that should not go at the expense of having then a limited set of capabilities at your disposal. So Yeah, the answer to the question is an absolute yes.
And it's already a lightweight component anyways, so why would you separate it in a micro gated component then?
Exactly.
Yeah, cool.
Any more questions? We kind of.
Yes, actually, yes, we do. We do have another question.
Nice.
Would I have to use the same deployment model for all environments, like dev, test, staging, prod?
Yeah, good and understandable question. So, of course, organizations might have different environments where they are promoting their APIs to and from. Starting with the development environment, maybe different test environments, integration test environment, user acceptance test, whatever might be there, production environment, production-like environments. But of course, you don't have to apply the same architecture throughout those environments, right?
Correct.
With this solution, you can choose to have, for instance, your test and development and your lower environments, I would say. It can be any environment, but typically you would say, well, for my lower environments, I'm using the full SaaS-based solution.
Yeah.
Also have my gateways in the SaaS hosting, but only for the production-like. Probably you would want to have one environment which is similar to your production environment at least, where you are actually hosting your gateways in your own infrastructure, in your cloud infrastructure, or anything like that. So in that sense, it's also a hybrid. In that you don't have to have the same setup throughout all your environments, but you can also have mixes of that as well. Anything to add on that, Olaf?
No, I fully agree. So I think that's kind of the beauty of the flexibility in the way you can deploy a solution. So if you would, for instance, go for a scenario where you have your dev and test in SaaS, that obviously would also give you a fast start, right? So if you're kind of engaging with an API management solution, then being able to leverage SaaS capabilities would give you that fast start. And typically, a lot of the concerns that we summarized in this webinar that might be associated with a SaaS-only deployment, they do not really directly apply to your dev and test environments, obviously. It would then be excellent if you could make use of SaaS and dev and test, and then for your more critical environments, like your production and staging environments, where these concerns do apply, are able to move away from exclusive SaaS and have your traffic flow through your own data centers. So again, making sure of a hybrid configuration. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you both again very much, Olaf and Elko. And we are kind of wrapping up now. I'm not seeing any other questions come in. So thank you all for attending today's webinar, Hybrid API Management Architectures. Just to let you know that once you do leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback. You will also be receiving a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of Akana and Devoteam and our presenters, thank you all for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.